Richo, who served with Bob Hawke, knew the man so well over many decades. Richo, your reflections this morning on the life and legacy of Bob Hawke on a sad day, not just for Labor, but for the nation.
It is a sad day. I'm feeling pretty sad. I spoke to him about a month or so ago. I ran into him at Vivid. Our wheelchairs knocked together at Vivid, and I had a great talk to him. And what I noticed then was the two of us are sitting there, and as the crowds go by, you would have not have known that I existed. All eyes were for Bob Hawke, and I think that was how it was with him for the whole of his life. All eyes were always upon him.
And he did try to be as a collaborative leader as possible, didn't he, Richo? What was it like to negotiate with him?
Well, you know, there were various ways I negotiated with him. I did have a fair hand in getting him up, so I suppose I was always in a good position to negotiate with him and to sort things out. But he was a fair man. He believed in consensus. And so if you're making a big decision, there'd always be at least half a dozen people in the room. There would never be just one or two. He always made sure that he had around him a number of different voices so he could pick and choose what was best. That was his consensus style. And he did it really, really well. A lot of people couldn't do what he did, just in terms of style, the way he conducted himself. But what it meant was everyone felt they had an oar in the water. Everyone felt they owned a part of the business. And that's what made him, I think, pretty special.
Richo, it's interesting you say that in terms of your consensus approach in Cabinet and elsewhere, because my brief experiences with him was also the fact that he gave, you know, everyday people, the punters, that sort of time and that sort of listening as well, that he engaged with them. He didn't brush people aside if they came up for a photograph or a beer or whatever.
No, he loved people. And he, you know, let's face it, he loved being adored, and he was adored. It was something he rather enjoyed. So he never missed an opportunity to talk to a punter. And he did so very generously, sometimes much to the annoyance of his aides and assistants, because they'd be trying to usher him on to the next thing and he'd be talking to people. He loved talking to people. He always did.
He wasn't perfect. He would even admit that. His family admits that. Do you think a Bob Hawke in 2019 would survive?
No. Buckley's. Every telephone's a camera, and there were too many times out in public when he was, to say the least, untidy. I could say more, but I won't. So no, I don't think that a Bob Hawke could be elected today. We wouldn't tolerate a Prime Minister being drunk. You know, you can't imagine Scott Morrison on the tiles, so to speak. It just wouldn't happen. And Bill Shorten wouldn't either. I mean, politicians are much more guarded these days. Media coverage is so great, and of course you've now got social media, which you didn't have in his day. You've got to remember that when Hawke was Prime Minister, there was no internet. I mean, it's a hell of a change.
Yeah. And when it's ironic, though, when we say the cameras everywhere would be a vulnerability, when it was actually his strength being on, when he was on camera, wasn't it, Richo? I remember as a kid seeing that iconic moment where he said, if any boss sacks their work, if they're not showing up today, they're a bum.
They're a bum, yeah.
And the way he celebrated, like he was the celebrator in chief, wasn't he? Such a larrikin, and everyone could understand him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was one of us. That was the point about him. You know, he wasn't someone pontificating from above. He was one of us, and he was proud to be one of us. He wanted to be one of us. That's where he was happiest. So that made him, in some respects, unique. I mean, you know, he followed Fraser, who was hardly one of anyone. Fraser was just such a patrician, a distant patrician, whereas this bloke, he was just one of the mob and wanted to be. Yes, he dressed a bit better, spoke a bit better, and all the rest of it. But he loved a beer. He loved his dirty, great big cigars. I mean, that was Hawke, and I think that was part of his charm, was that he was so ordinary in some respects and so extraordinary in others.
a huge intellect without the pomposity, a Rhodes scholar, but yeah, an everyman. It's amazing to see the different public perceptions compared to Paul Keating, for example, who did leave school at 15, but in later life, you know, he loves his classical music and he too is an intellect. Tell us about how he used that intellect, because he didn't do it with great arrogance and didn't force it upon people, did he?
No, he didn't. He was a persuader, a gentle persuader. He didn't seek to barge his way through. It wasn't just a matter of you know, getting in a Sherman tank and knocking everything over in front of him. He just tried to take people with him, and he was very successful at doing it. I mean, when Hawke turned on the charm, he could be an incredibly charming bloke, and I think he used that all his life. He could just disarm you. You could walk into his office really angry with him, wanting to strangle him, and you'd come out half an hour later saying what a great bloke he was. He was very, very good at that sort of stuff.
He had a net in the lodge, apparently got golf lessons there and used to have nine holes before Parliament, and I believe an individual by the name of Graham Richardson used to join him on the links as well before Parliament.
I did, yeah. We get up terribly early and play Royal Canberra, and it was fabulous to do it at that time of the morning. You know, crystal clear mornings and absolutely nobody on the course, barely anyone awake in Canberra, and we'd be off, and then we'd go back to the lodge, have some bacon and eggs, and go to work. I used to love those days. I cherished them, except one day he had about a 100-foot putt downhill from off the green. I gave him $1,000, 1,000 to 1. He put $2 on it and sank it. That did upset me a bit, just a tad, I'd have to say.
Now, that is one story you can tell us in these hours of breakfast television, Richo. I imagine there's plenty more that aren't for public consumption, but what was with the nudity?
Shower patrol. We all were on shower patrol at times, and you know, you'd shudder when the staff would point to the door of the bathroom and go, "Oh, bucket, not again." But in you'd go, and there he was, lathering himself and making sure you saw everything that he had, which wasn't that much, by the way, but still he liked it, and so we all got to see it. And I might say there were some women went in there as well. So there you go. That was Hawke. He was an amazing man. It could be said just a tad vain, but then again, a little vanity in all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. Flaws, but much greater strengths, weren't they, in terms of if we go from that view of the world to the big picture, Richo. He was someone, you know, while, you know, we spoke about his weaknesses and so on, but one thing that he was so strong on and that he simply hated was racism. And he fought against apartheid. He stood up for people here and abroad. Oh, yeah.
He had a few things that really moved him. And if you remember, he fought against racism. At the time that I thought he was most upset was when the Chinese students were being run over by tanks in Tiananmen Square. He was incredibly upset at that. There was a lot of humanity. He was a kind man, and I think that showed out, you know, very, very many times.
Yeah, it certainly did. His family life was one thing, his public life was another. What do you think his greatest political achievement will be remembered as? I mean, economic and social reform more broadly, but if there's one thing, Richo.
Well, I think you've got to say Medicare is the biggest thing. I mean, that was a massive social reform, which is still with us today, and I dare say it'll be with us for another 50 years or whatever. So, I mean, that was a huge reform, and you've got to take your hat off to him on that one. But he also took down the trade barriers, and that changed Australia for the better. And it was too late in coming, but Fraser had done nothing in his period, and so a lot of the reforming that had to be done in Australia had to be done by Hawke and Keating, and they did a fabulous job on it. And I think Hawke will be remembered as a great reformer.
We spoke to Troy Bramston earlier, who spoke about the fact that the two men, Hawke and Keating, did have a rapprochement quite some time ago, actually. It wasn't just in recent weeks. They have, I guess, healed some of those wounds from that period, but before Bob Hawke's passing. But, Richo, there was a mutual respect there, wasn't there? There obviously, in more recent times, we've seen divisions within the Labor Party, not always a great deal of respect, I think it's fair to say, but between those two individuals there was.
Of course there was. I mean, each one of them knew the other's strengths. They also knew the other's weaknesses. But they knew that the strengths far outweighed the weaknesses in both cases. Labor was just so fortunate to have two giants come along at the same time. That just very rarely happens. And you've just got to say they were mighty human beings, these two, and they did a mighty job.
We spoke about Bob Hawke's partnerships, and that, Richo, is one of the most formidable partnerships we've ever seen in Australian political history. But Bob Hawke simply loved women. He had a great love for Hazel, but his great love in later life was with Blanche, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about it that his love affair with Blanche, which went forever. I mean, it was going for decades. I mean, he was truly in love with her, and that was always great to see. But he was truly in love with Hazel. I mean, this is a complex man. He's not just a simple one-page read. This is a full book, and you can't just take one part of his life in isolation with the other, because you've got to look at the whole picture. And, the picture shows flaws, there's no doubt about that, but it also shows greatness. And I think there's a lot more greatness than there is of the flaws.
And finally, Richo, we spoke about he enjoyed the limelight, he enjoyed the affection and the adoration, but he was someone who could see the strengths in others as well, with that chairman approach to cabinet, that he let people like Button, yourself, Gareth Evans, and a very strong, they say it's the best cabinet of the modern era.
Yeah, Grimes, Dawkins, Walsh, Button, Kerrin, there was an outstanding bunch. I guess, again, that's luck. You just happen to have this confluence of really good people turning up all at the same time. And then you had a great chairman of the board, a really good board and a really good chairman. It worked. It worked its head off for a long time. And it was a pleasure to be a part of it, an honour.
Well, Richo, it's wonderful to talk to you this morning. Thanks for telling us and retelling the stories. I think this might go for a week. There'll be a lot of people gathering right around Australia, retelling their own personal stories about Bob Hawke. Thanks so much.